Hi, everyone. Welcome to episode 299 of the All Dolphins podcast. Almost getting there to 300.
Almost made 300. I was like, spin the wheel. Spin, what's that? Wheel of Fortune. Can I get that 300 click? I got 299.
I'll accept bid to be the guest for episode 300. So, yeah, it's a good idea you just gave me. I am joined today by award-winning South Florida Sun Sentinel columnist and longtime South Florida sports writer, Dave Hyde. Dave, how are you?
I'm good. Following the Panthers, but paying attention to the Dolphins because they're always making news, aren't they? It never stops.
Yes, they are, and we like it like that. Although the NFLPA apparently wants to stop making news in the offseason, at least on the field news, with their supposed proposal that they're going to put together to ban the OTAs. We're going to get into that a little bit. We're going to get into, obviously, the Jaylen Waddle contract extension. Yes, we're going to talk some Tua. We're going to try to limit it because some people have Tua contract fatigue. A little bit. There you go. Tyreek Hill as well. We're not going to talk a ton of Panthers, although, yeah, go Panthers. Great win last night. 3-2 for those who missed it. They now lead the series 3-2 against the New York Rangers for a return trip to the Stanley Cup final. And that is some kind of massively impressive. And this is where, in relation to the Dolphins, this is where all Dolphin fans would want to be. Is it not?
Imagine going to the Super Bowl back-to-back years. Even you lost one, but you're getting another crack at it, making that long journey back again. They got it up and running. They are not just a good franchise. That general manager Bill Zito's just gold move after gold move, picking guys off waivers like us. But to me, covering it, what I like to cover is excellence in sports, and you're seeing a quarter century of a dysfunctional franchise turn into a great product right now, and it's interesting to watch.
No, they've become the standard for South Florida franchises, and as you mentioned, I mean, I covered the Panthers for, almost as long as I've covered the Dolphins. Obviously, not as long since they came into existence in 1993. This is the first year I'm actually not covering the Panthers as a correspondent for NHL.com because it wound up being too much on my plate. My last year covering them, they went to the Stanley Cup final, and for me, it was like blown away by how far they come from some of the dark times where they basically were bending over backwards to give away tickets, and they would play Ottawa on a Tuesday night, and there would be way more empty seats than there were fans in the seats. And now to where they are, it's remarkable, and it's such a fun ride. Again, we're not going to linger on the Panthers. As promised, we're going to do a history lesson with a different twist on this time with a couple of branches. So we'll start with the year, which was 1999, since we're on episode 299, which happened to be Dan Marino's final year and Jimmy Johnson's final year as head coach. And we'll start with the draft. The Dolphins did not have a first-round pick in 1999 because they had traded it the year before for a second-round pick, which they used on cornerback Patrick Surtain. And if you're familiar with his career, there is not a soul in the world who would say that turned out to be a bad trade, even though you surrendered a future number one to pick a number two. Season in 1999 was kind of what it had been under Jimmy Johnson, which was solid, not great. I want to say they were 9-7. Dan Marino was injured through the year. Also, his knees were kind of getting bad and worse and worse and worse. The low point of the season was a 20-0 loss on Thanksgiving Day at Dallas. They went into the playoffs, defeated the Seattle Seahawks, who then were playing in the AFC. Comeback win 20-17. Game-winning touchdown scored by rookie running back J.J. Johnson from Mississippi State, who was a second-round pick. And then the following week, the Dolphins played at Jacksonville. And the last game of Marino's career and Jimmy Johnson's NFL coaching career. Wow. Let's say the less said about that game, the better. For those who don't recall, the final score was 62-7. Dolphins were overmatched, number one. They weren't nearly as good a team as Jacksonville. And everything that could go wrong went wrong. It was just a really painful day. Anything stand out to you about 1999, Dave Hyde?
Well, about that game, a couple of things. Now, I wrote the book with Jimmy Johnson, so I've talked to him about this game, and a couple of things. One is the Seattle win was a very emotional win. You know, they come back win, big win Sunday night out west. They play Saturday at noon, or I believe it was.
Yes, yeah, yes, it was.
Peter King about this, and Peter King says in the history of the NFL, there has never been a turnaround like that in the playoffs. So they weren't going to beat Jacksonville anyways. A little more time, they might have staved off some of the embarrassment of the score. At one point, Kevin O'Neill was the trainer, longtime trainer, good friend of Jimmy's. And Jimmy said to him, boy, I haven't seen nothing like this. And Kevin turned to him, oh, yeah, you have. You've been on the other sideline.
Yeah, that's funny.
I mean, the Super Bowl when they clocked the Bills. So
Yep.
it wasn't a good day for the Dolphins. I take issue when people say the most embarrassing loss in Dolphin history. It was the playoffs, okay? It can't be a second round of the playoffs even. Do you know what this franchise would do to get to the second round of the playoffs right now? It can't be the most embarrassing loss of the franchise when you're in the second round of the playoffs.
And that win at Seattle, by the way, is the last time the Dolphins won a road playoff game. And I know if we're talking about these current Dolphins, the whole thing is they need to play at home in the playoffs.
Yeah.
Well, Dolphins have shown in the past that they can win on the road. In fact, the perfect season of 1972, because the AFC Championship game in those days and the NFC Championship game, home field was awarded through a rotation basis, and it would change from year to year for divisions. Dolphins were, even though they hadn't lost a game in the regular season, they played at Pittsburgh in that 1972 AFC Championship game, and obviously they won. So it can be done. A couple of other things related to 99 that I want to bring up, one of which is the jersey number. And by the way, if you check out si.com/NFL/Dolphins, you will notice that I have become I don't want to say my annual, but my regular, I do this every couple of years, countdown to the start of the regular season by the day, how many days left, that number of days, and then the players who wore that jersey number, and then the three best who did it. When it came to 99, the obvious choice was Jason Taylor. But the thing with Jason Taylor, and there's a conversation to be had here, nobody's worn it since he retired after the 2011 season. And I've always thought, if nobody else is ever going to wear it, and that applies to Zach Thomas in 54, why are the Dolphins simply not retiring it or handing out to somebody else? I mean, it's kind of like unofficially retired without the ceremony. And I get that you don't, I mean, I don't know, your thoughts on this.
Well, let's go, since we're doing history, let's go back to Larry Zonka's number, 39. Dan Dow was the equipment manager in charge of, and he refused to hand out 39 to other players until it was retired. Now, maybe I would assume somebody's asked for 54. 99, maybe nobody's asked for it. Probably somebody has. Either they're waiting for the right player to give it to, or they've unofficially retired it internally and are waiting for a ceremony. But I if they're going to retire it, it's time, right? I mean, plenty of time has passed.
No, and that's the thing. And if memory serves, I believe there was a player who wore 54 in a training camp, and it was almost like very quickly after he began wearing it, he switched to a different number. Like somebody was like, whoa, no. That looks wrong there. And I can't remember who the player was or the year, but that's for some reason stuck in my head. And my philosophy on retiring jersey numbers, I tend to not like it because what's the criteria and where does it end? I mean, because again, it's not purely a Hall of Famers, because Dolphins have 10 or 11 Hall of Famers, and they've retired three numbers, 12, 13, and 39. Is it setting league records? Okay, then why is Ricky Williams' jersey not retired? He led the NFL in rushing in 2002. Again, what's the criteria? And as great as
it's a feel thing. Who should be retired?
Yeah,
and I would say Jason and Zach are ready to be retired. If they're going to do it, retire them. I have no problem with that. I like a little history there.
And I don't either. But part of me would say, okay, then what about Dwight Stevenson, who to me I think may have been the best. If we take position importance away from it, to me might be the most dominant player the Dolphins ever had. And if you don't believe me, check out film of him if you can find on YouTube. That dude was a dude. I mean, he was a player. But I guess in terms of they're the most recent guys, if they retired Jason and Zach's numbers, I wouldn't have any issue with that. The other branch of that discussion that we can have, and this we can't spend too much time on this, even though we could. If you were to do a Fab Four, I use Fab Four instead of Mount Rushmore. A Fab Four, a Dolphins Fab Four. Who's in it, including everybody, coach, administrators, and all that?
Oh, wow. Well, it's got to be Shula Marino would be the first two.
Okay.
Then you have to go with Zonka because he was the face of the 70 dynasty, the early 70 dynasty, more than Shula. So I would say the plain face. Now the fourth one is going to take me a few minutes to sit here and think of who belongs out there.
See, my third one was easy, and it wasn't Zonka. My third one was Joe Robbie because he brought the team and he built the stadium.
Well, there we go. Are we talking? What are we talking? I guess then I couldn't disagree with you if we're talking organizationally and everything. Then Joe Robbie. If we're just talking the football field, the product on the field. I mean, you could still argue Robbie, I guess, but I was limiting it to players. So I guess I'd go with Robbie then too. But there we go. Nobody's in the last quarter century, regardless of how you're doing it. So,
no, that's a very good point. And this is where, and if you go strictly players, I think you have to have Marino. I think Zonka would belong there. Then you could have discussions, right? Then you could include certainly Dwight Stevenson. You could include JT. You could include Jack. Does Nick Bonacani deserve a mention?
They have two quarterbacks in the Hall of Fame, Greasy and Marino. You'd have to discuss Greasy too, because of the importance of the position. Zach and Jason Taylor, just to give it a look of some modern look, even though they've been for 15 years or so. So the fourth one to me would be an interesting one. I couldn't argue with Joe Robbie. If he could be number one for that matter, if you're going to go ownership too.
No, correct. And that could be a very, very good long debate. Okay, let's bring it forward to 2024. I guess the big topic of the week is Jaylen Waddle on the contract extension. So when you saw it, 3-year extension, $84.5 million. Tacked on, kicks in 2026 after he plays out the final year of his rookie contract and then the 5th-year option. You saw it, you saw the numbers, and your reaction was what, Dave Hyde?
Good deal. They got it done. Really look at it, talk it like adults. It's a 5-year, $105 million contract. Okay. Mm-hmm. Forget the extension tacked on. Take what they have, add to it. 5 years, 105. So it's $20 million a year. And especially moving forward, the cap keeps going up. Look, they have to get some business done here. They can't keep losing players. A year from now, if Jaylen Waddle isn't signed, then they're in trouble with them, just as they became with Christian Wilkins, and go down the line of a lot of the guys they lost this year. They need to keep these guys. Now it leads to the natural question of what about Tyreek Hill? He's going to want more too, and that's part of doing business in the NFL today.
Yeah, and to me, the thing where, again, I kind of go back and forth in terms of where I think this is going to land is, number one, the Dolphins have built their blueprint around speed and killing teams with their speed. And to that end, you can't let Tyreek Hill go. You need to hang on to him as long as he's highly productive. On the flip side, you could have signed him to an extension earlier in the offseason at a time when it could have reduced his, and it still could do that, but they could have reduced in the process of signing him to an extension, reduce his cap number for 2024 when they were looking for ways throughout the offseason to do that. And yet they didn't do it. And his guaranteed money is up after this season. And I can't help but connect the dots and think to me that maybe they're thinking that maybe he's not on the team in 2025.
Well, let's start here. Tyreek Hill's 30. Okay. He's a speed guy. Now he's a very physical speed guy, but he's a speed guy too. And so, the Dolphins are in a lot of this is such an important time for them from a contractual standpoint. Who do they sign? How much do they sign? There's obviously Tua. Javon Holland is out there. What do they do with him? He's shown flashes of greatness and flashes of okayness. And Tyreek Hill's the centerpiece to all those questions because I think we agree he's the engine that makes a lot of things go on this team. And so what do you do with him? He's definitely going to want more money when he's in, and I'm sure that's on the table. There's other guys out there waiting for contracts. In Minnesota, they got a pretty good receiver who is probably going to break the bank and go number one. And Tyreek Hill might be waiting for him to say, hey, I want more. But if they are going to go with speed, they need these two guys. The question becomes, how do you, for Chris Greer and the guys inside, how do you manage your salary cap? And to the future, you haven't won anything yet, but these are your guys. How do you manage it going forward? Look, Tyreek Hill's, like I said, 30. OBJ's 31, and everybody's saying, "Oh, he's over the hill." He's on the down, and he is on that. He's not what he was.
Right.
And how do you measure that with Tyreek Hill? He hasn't really shown any signs that his game's going down. He's still a dominant player. But you get, if you're putting a contract out there with real numbers, not the fake number that his contract has right now, or at the end, I think his does. I'm a little.
Yeah, he's got one more year.
Yeah. Okay, so you go out 3 years, he'll be 33, and so again, these are the things that you got to get right if you're going to win, and especially with your best players.
Yeah, I think this is why for a second when like the smoke about the Dolphins may be interested in Xavier Worthy, the speedster from the University of Texas, in the draft. To me, it was almost like, if they do get him, there's your successor to Tyreek to keep the 1-2 punch with Jaylen Waddle. Didn't work out that way. They went the Chop Robinson route, which for 2024 to me clearly was a better move. But no, that's going to be a tricky situation. And to me, and I don't think it's an issue of age, but the thing with Tyreek, especially when you combine it with Waddle, is exactly how much money you're going to devote to your two wide receivers. And if they do wind up paying Tua as well, can you afford to have like three really, really high cap number guys at those positions? And if so, for how long?
Yeah. And this is where the loss of draft picks the past 3 years, really the previous 2 years, but go into this year too. They were without some middle round picks, 3 and 4. Or obviously they traded for 3. Don't send me notes. I get that, but they've had the least draft capital in the last 3 years, and this is where you get some of that good, cheaper, younger talent coming in to help you with decisions of contracts and whatnot, and they don't really have that luxury, and so Chris Greer's got to be perfect on these decisions, and like I said, when they went down this road of tanking and then turn it around and trading picks, he's either come out of here a Hall of Fame general manager because he's going to get everything right, and no general manager has had the luxury of all these resources, or it's just going to be too much, and it's they're going to be in trouble, and this offseason is really the apex of decision making for them. not last offseason when they had a lot of decisions to make. Do they sign Wilkins or what do they do with their lines? How are they going to spend money there? What do they do with Van Ginkel? What do they do with their two safeties?
Mhm.
And they decided, okay, well, we can lose them all. Okay, but you can't keep losing them all. You especially the other players look at it who have been drafted. They're saying, well, they're throwing money at everybody from the outside. How about giving it to some of us on the inside? So we're at the core of tough decisions for Chris Greer and the Dolphins.
Yeah, no, you make a very good point that this being one of the most important off seasons in terms of decision making, and it's the result of the convergence of all these high profile young players having salary situations, contract situations that come up at the same time, including the biggest one, which is always the quarterback with Tua in his situation. Not that I want to pit you against your Sun Sentinel colleague, even though that's fun. That would be fun. So, go for it. Did you say go for it? Cool. So your colleague Chris Perkins wrote a column basically suggesting the Dolphins need to be wary of not giving Tua his big contract extension, because chances are if they don't and they make him play on the fifth-year option, chances are they're not going to get a guy who's fully committed, who, if he's dealing with a minor injury that he otherwise could play through, might be looking for his own self-interest and, not necessarily push anything. Where do you stand on this?
Well, those are two separate subjects to me. One is he's going to max out what he wants to do, because look at Dak Prescott. Mm-hmm. It's a similar situation, and what he makes $60 million last year. I mean, if we're talking financially, the best thing for Tua, and I'm not talking security nor what I would do in his situation, but if you're just talking max dollars, the thing to do would ball out and don't sign the extension, because if he balls out and becomes a top 7 quarterback or whatever, top 10 quarterback, the money will go through the roof for him. Now, that said, as there were questions Lamar Jackson's health when he didn't sign the extension, and at the end of that season, was he sitting out to protect a $250 million investment in his body, and so he doesn't get hurt and hurt his contract situation. Makes sense to me. If the team doesn't sign you and you are hurt, and you could, let me step away from Lamar Jackson's situation here, because I don't know, but that was one of the topics out there. Let's say you're hurt going into the end of the year, and you could play through it, and you might damage yourself further, and you're coming to the end of your contract that could be $250 million. What player wouldn't say,
no, correct,
I'm gonna back off here and think of myself, because that's what I have to do in this situation. So those are two separate situations. I think Tua would not step off the gas pedal and be upset and right. Oh, play as hard because they no boo-hoo. No, because it actually be in his best interest to do the opposite and play as hard as he can. But the injury situation, I think that that's a legitimate issue to me.
No, correct. And then I had some folks on Twitter brought up the issue of disrespect. Is it disrespectful for the Dolphins not to give him a contract extension? Again, understanding that always, if basically Tua is asking, you got to give me everything that the Lions gave Jared Goff plus $1, basically, because apparently that's a rule now that every contract has to be just slightly higher than the previous one. Is it disrespectful for the Dolphins to say, no, we can't structure it like that? Particularly, I'm going to guess in terms of the guaranteed money, because Goff got $176 million guaranteed, and I don't know that the Dolphins want to go that high based on Tua's injury history.
Well, is it disrespectful? If I'm Tua, I might see it that way. If I'm let's take a step back. The Dolphins have pretty much given Tua everything and been behind him 1,000%, right? And all of a sudden, they're not giving him the big contract because for health reasons, you could get 10 quarterbacks to do the game he's played, if you believe that in this system. To they just not sure he's the guy. So it would be in some measure I'm not going to say 180 degree, but it would be a little different course for the franchise. But it also is the first time they really would have had to invest in him. And to me, if I'm organizationally thinking of what's best, these are questions you got to ask. Okay, what do we think of his health? He's had one healthy year, one not healthy year, and nagging injuries throughout. We structured our offense to do something to get the ball out quicker than anybody's ever gotten it out this past season. So I think these are legitimate questions the Dolphins have to ask. And again, to me, that it's just not news right after Goff signed that they signed that's a healthy situation to me. It's that there's legitimate discussion of what's best for us going on.
No, correct. And this is again, and I get the loyalty and the fervor of his fans. I get all that, but this is one of the more complicated contract situations that you could be dealing with, because it's not a slam dunk one way or the other. I'm like one of those who I've advocated for let him play on the 5th-year option and see how it plays out. But even to that, to me, it's not like a slam dunk that's clearly the right choice. I just think it's slightly a better alternative between two that are, again, it's really, really complicated because there are a lot of factors involved there.
Yeah, throw him out on the free market, and what is his market value?
Correct.
To me, it'd have to be a warm weather, a dome team, someplace that you don't have to go and play 3 times potentially in the cold against your division rivals. That's not a perfect situation for Tua. Not right now. Now there's time he can change that. I mean, we're not to the finished product of who he is, but right now these are issues that if you're going to say, let's give him the break the bank with the contract, that I'd have issues with tying up the franchise for that long.
Yeah, and this is where I think this notion of always one deal has to top the previous one comes into play. And the Detroit Lions did the Dolphins absolutely no favors whatsoever with the deal they gave Jared Goff, who I think you and I would both agree is serviceable, solid, can be very productive in that offense, which features some really, really good skill position players. They have a ridiculously fast running back in Jahmyr Gibbs. Amon-Ra St. Brown is a great, I hate to call him a possession receiver, but that's kind of his style. They have the burner in Jamison Williams. They have a stud young tight end in Sam Laporta. And, they have the best offensive line in the NFL.
Yeah, Jared Goff's a tough one. He went to the Super Bowl with the Rams. And then McVay said, no, we can't win with them, and trade him to Detroit. And then he goes, if he makes a couple plays in San Francisco, I mean, you can come to Dan Campbell and all that. But regardless, they made the NFC Championship game. Yeah. What do you do with it? And here comes Trevor Lawrence too. His contract's out there, and I don't know what I would do with Trevor Lawrence if I'm Jacksonville. Do you have to pay him? I mean, here's a guy who he hasn't won. He also had a terrible offensive line and terrible help around him.
And this is where also, Dave, it's not unprecedented, because I know like a lot of people are going to point, get to his passer rating the last 2 years. How could you possibly think about not moving on? Well, Jared Goff had a couple of seasons with the Rams with a passer rating over 100, and they moved on because he wasn't good enough. Jimmy G's passer rating is off the charts, and his one-loss record was great, and they moved on from him. And yes, part of it was because he was always injured. Another part of it was because they wanted to move on and get somebody else. So it's not like it's unprecedented to look at, if you get like completely bogged down and just zoned in purely on stats.
Here's the interesting Pro Football Focus he was the number one rated quarterback by the numbers, by their measure, by Pro Football Focus. They did their ranking of quarterbacks. I believe he was number 18.
Mm-hmm.
So that tells you what a tough, you can't just go by the numbers because there's a whole different set of facts out there on Tua too. You look how he's played against the Bills, how he played twice against Kansas City last year. And how do you stack that up against, the pinball numbers this offense put up with him throwing the ball? So this is a tough one for the Dolphins to get right, and they got to get it right. They're unlucky. Obviously, Jalen Phillips got hurt. Not a good situation, but he's a superstar in the making, and there would be another contract they would have had to deal with right now in this offseason. So obviously they weren't lucky he got hurt. Everybody would rather he's healthy, but because he's hurt, that's a sort of pushed off to the side for a while. They got enough on their plate right now.
Correct. And then to me, it's like, as you mentioned, this is you're talking about the quarterback contract. It's the biggest contract. And this is why you harp on it more, because it's the biggest contract. And to me, if you're going to mess it up and blunder it, I would rather you blunder it by you go overly cautious, you play on the 5th-year option, he completely balls out, and he costs you more next year. And because here's the thing, if he completely balls out, chances are the Dolphins are winning a playoff game or getting closer to the Super Bowl or in the Super Bowl. And at that point, are fans really going to bitch that, well, he cost us now $55 million, $57 million a year instead of $50 million a year? Really, are fans really going to complain about that if it means you got a Super Bowl appearance because he played so well in 2024?
We're on the same page here. This is a situation I would rather overpay when I have more answers than overpay right now when I don't have. I feel like it's an incomplete ledger on Tua, and it's, here we go. I've said this. Say, Ryan Tannehill, how many years are we going to go before? But with Tua, it's a different situation. It's health. After it's health, it's can he pick up a team and take it somewhere, or is he just on for the ride? Is he accompanying a good offense? And so I would rather wait. I'm with you and check some more boxes before. And if that means overpaying him, then you overpay him.
I concur. On that note, I think that's going to wrap it up. I want to thank my guest, Dave Hyde, for once again joining me. I want to thank you guys for watching. Please like and subscribe. And that's going to wrap it up for this week. We will be back on Monday as we'll preview as much of a preview as you can have for the mandatory minicamp, which is next week to wrap up the offseason program. On that note, Dave, you have a great weekend, my friend. And thanks, everyone.
Tip of my chateau to your Montreal chateau.
There you go.